Hello, my name is Leszek Zawistowski. With the collaboration of my wife, Toni Rapport Zawistowski, and daughter, Monique Zawistowski, I wrote this book, Children and Fish Don't Talk, Adventures with Nazis, Communism, and the Metropolitan Opera. I would like to share and to read to you a few excerpts of that book, and perhaps you can enjoy it. Brooklyn, New York, November 1964. Maria and Joseph Mikrut finished Mass that Sunday morning feeling spiritually satiated. There were the typical solemn expressions that were etched into the faces of all the Polish immigrants who filled the congregation, and their broad shoulders slumped under the weight of their piety. The flag was poor, elderly, and pale. Their skin looked like boiled chicken. While I was only 26 years old, far from devout or obedient, and achingly hungry for breakfast. But I deferred to the Mikruts and didn't hurry them along. Maria lowered her eyes in profound humility under her kerchief, hoping the priest would take notice. And as always, he did. Cupping her calloused hands in his own, Reverend Jakubik offered his blessing while I stood aside patiently. The Mikruts never ate before attending Mass. They made a point of fasting until receiving the sacrament of communion. And I felt obliged to honor them, my guardian angels. I was, after all, their resident fugitive. Carrying my cello in its second-hand case, I was happy to play Gounod's Ave Maria in their place of worship, on an empty stomach, in exchange for discretion and a roof over my head. Maria took Joseph's arm, and I gripped my cello case as we finally headed home in the cold. I was starving for Maria's traditional Polish spread, her tasty buttered bread accompanied by a dish of salt and an array of mouth-watering sausages, especially the finger-thin, semi-dry cabanossi, my favorite, was a savory reward after laboring over their fate. And of course, the meal would always begin with a vodka toast to a century of good health, Stolat. We turned the corner onto 16th Street, and the first thing I saw was a long black patent car parked in front of Joseph's ailing Ford. The Mikruts noticed it too, I'm sure, as each of us slowed our pace and held our tongues. Nobody in the neighborhood owned such a car. If I had been alone, I would have thought twice about proceeding down the block. I may have stopped, coolly lit my pipe, and changed directions. But I did not want to seem nervous around Maria, so I kept moving. Only a few feet from our brownstone, the car doors opened in unison, and two men with synchronized efficiency stepped out onto the sidewalk in front of us. They wore pressed dark suits with starched shirts and striped ties. One of them took a brass badge from his pocket and identified himself as U.S. immigration officer. He asked if my name was Leszek Zawistowski. Yes, I responded, even though I hardly understood any English. He continued, Mr. Zawistowski, you are under arrest for remaining in the United States of America illegally. The other man took my cello without a word, handed it to Joseph, who was in a state of shock, and snapped a pair of handcuffs on my wrists. I wanted to fall to my knees, but tears were pouring down Maria's face, and if I crumbled, she would have thrown herself on top of me and created a scene. Nie płacz, don't cry, I said. I'm going to be okay. Call Father Donjou and my lawyer, Lydia Savoyka, right away. The dread that had been dominating my thoughts for years shot through me like rifle fire. The two officers were very orderly and polite, nothing like the KGB agents who beat the hell out of my father in the frost of 1945, leaving a trail of blood in the snow, or the Gestapo who seized my oldest brother Henrik with similar brutality. Nonetheless, I was convulsing with fear. I tried to find reassurance in the words of my attorney. Bądź spokojny, be calm, I will protect you. The officers on either side of me pulled me into the waiting car, and once more I pleaded with the Mikroots to call Savoyka. Maria acknowledged my request with a twitch and nod of her head between sobs. She cried for me as if she were watching her only son getting dragged away in shackles. My own mother would never have abandoned her fortitude in front of authority. The car thundered toward Manhattan, and with every bump in the road, the handcuffs sliced into my skin. I told myself, arresting me is an absurd mistake. I am not a threat. I spent the night before entertaining New Yorkers at Radio City Music Hall, delighting them with holiday tunes in time to the Rockettes, whose perfume still lingers on my skin. This country is supposed to welcome me. That was Voice of America's promise. For God's sake, I am just a musician in search of freedom. When we arrived at an undisclosed location, my handcuffs were removed and I was put into a windowless holding cell. Alone, I closed my eyes and began to piece together my case. How will I convince a judge that my only hope for a future is in his hands? And if he returns me to where I came from, it will be all over. My argument will have to start with my earliest childhood, long before I defected, before I was a cellist, and even before I was abandoned as a 4-year-old in the Polish countryside in war-torn Europe. Thank you. I hope to see you next week.